I'm now going to invite on stage our wonderful next panel, who's going to be extremely flexible, and they're going to reinvent the panel today for you. Impact Rising is an impact economy eminent. This panel is going to be facilitated by Myri McKay, Director of Social and Creative Economy at the British Council. The British Council has been one of our wonderful partners and sponsors this year. Thank you very much. Jed Emerson, founder of the Blended Value Group, and you saw his niece in the video this morning. John Simpkins, Vice President at the Aspen Institute. John. Clara Barbie, CEO of the Impact Management Project, another of our great partners. And Elias Masilela, Chair of DNA Economics and Chair of the South African National Advisory Board. Over to you for a creative and innovative panel.
Okay, yes, you can hear me, great. Well, thank you very much, and welcome to our panel. As you can see, we are minus seats. We've decided to innovate given the time frame. But it's my really great privilege to be here, and as the Right Honourable Minister said a while ago, we are here having a very profound conversation. I should probably explain why I'm here, facilitating that conversation. I work for the British Council and have done for a number of years. And this morning could not have been a better way of explaining the journey the British Council has been through in terms of this, this impact movement. I started working with the British Council a number of years ago, working with social entrepreneurs, at the time where the UK was very much working to create new innovations around the social economy. Sir Ronald was then the chair of the G8 task force, and what we really saw was the extent to which this conversation around the world builds trust and engagement and opportunity. And so the governor's idea of regenerating the rules of trust, I think, is a really profound way of understanding the idea of a new social contract. And I think that's why we're all here. You know, the conversation is changing, it's becoming much more urgent, it's needing us to bring different actors into that space. And so this particular group and this conversation that we're having around the idea of the impact economy was an invitation from Amit and Sir Ronald to convene a group of people who were thinking broader, deeper about, you know, where do we go next with this conversation? And, you know, I'm very privileged to have those individuals with me, standing on the stage, not dancing yet, but we might do that before coffee, we'll see. So what we've decided to do, given that we have a very limited amount of time, is start with our homework. Christina yesterday asked us to think about a word, which was the word that challenged us in terms of our own personal values around the impact economy. So, Jed, I'm going to hand over to you first.
My word is mutual impact. 2 words, but very important.
Elias.
I have 4 words.
You have 4?
Yeah.
So they're all cheating from the beginning.
Elias does this every time. He's like, I'm not going to play by your rules.
And the words are very important, listened to together.
Listen to together.
And they are frustration, impatience, anger, and danger. And that's what is defining our societies today. And unfortunately, however it starts, anger always ends in shame for everybody involved.
Clara.
2 words. Higher purpose. And I say that because one of the things I think we need to be very careful about is, as we pursue our individual purposes, our institutional purposes, we do that recognizing that we are united by a higher purpose. And we always must make decisions in that context, not for the sake of our own ego or institutional ego.
Well, I might go with my word next. This is very spontaneous, but compassion has always been the word that, for me, represented the work that we have done. And the quote that I love that represents compassion to me is a Thomas Merton quote, which is that compassion is a keen awareness of the interdependence of all things. And I think there is something about really understanding just how connected we all are to one another, and to, therefore, something that has a higher collective purpose. And that challenges us to really think very deeply about the way that we move the impact economy forward. John.
So I'm a lawyer. I only have one word.
Good.
Dignity. And dignity is it's the cornerstone principle of the German basic law post-World War II. It is also a foundational principle of the South African Constitution. But especially following on the governor's words, what's clear to me is that a sustained, aggressive practice of humanity is good business, it's good politics, it's the right thing to do, and it's truly disruptive.
And in terms of how we take all of that and ask questions about how imminent the impact economy is, so that was the question we were going to begin with, so maybe we'll go there next, and I'll come back to you, Jed. How do we feel in terms of how imminent the impact economy is, and how close we are to really creating those next levels of tipping points that we need?
Sure. William Gibson is a science fiction writer, and he observed that the future is here, it's just not widely distributed. And when I think about the impact economy, it's here, but not everybody seems to know it. And people are in various places in the discovery of it. And if you think back historically, there are many periods in time and cultures that had a very different understanding of the role and place of economics. And it's just that in the last 3 centuries, we've gone horribly astray, and we've come to think that what's important is the transaction as opposed to the relationship within which the transaction is held. And so when I spoke before about a mutual impact, it's the idea that we become transformed as much in the process and the relationship of impact investing as those that we seek to have an effect upon. And it goes to this question of trust, it goes to the question of dignity, it goes to the question of how do we use this as an opportunity not to do deals and not to go to this place of the transactive nature of impact investing, but go to that higher place of engaging ourselves with our capital as a vehicle and a tool for realization of that higher purpose. And that's where we're headed. We just don't seem to know it yet on the collective sense.
And do we not know it, or do we just not know what to do with it? I mean, there's 2 questions there, I guess, and maybe I'll unfairly come to Clara next and ask. Of course. Because so much of that, even if we agree, and even if there's a consensus around that's what we need to do, is very, very challenging. It's deeply challenging to think about how you measure and account for those changed behaviours, and at an individual, organisational and systemic level. I mean, this is big stuff. So
yes, practice versus sentiment, because I'm with you, Jed. The sentiment's there, even if people don't see it yet. In practice, I'm hopeful. So at government level, you've got New Zealand now having a well-being budget as a budget they use for decision-making on allocation of resources, not just GDP. So it's happening at the highest level in government. At the level of investors, I'm engaged in a project looking at whether impact is in fact consistent with fiduciary duty. And it's moved from is ESG risk, so just looking at environmental and social risks as being consistent with fiduciary duty, to actually looking at whether it can be within the scope of fiduciary duty to deliver on an asset owner's impact aspirations. Those practical levers are essential to move from theory to practice. And at the company level, you've got a hell of a lot more CEOs now saying, it's quite interesting actually, they say that they are redefining the purpose of the corporation as to serve the economy or society, but in fact what they're actually doing is reverting to what it was, which is what Jed referenced.
And how do we sort of invite more people into that conversation? How is that?
So I think one of the things that is both the opportunity and the challenge on this at the practice level is that we have we have got to a point where there's still resistance from those who treat the existing accounting system that we have as a given, almost as though it's a scientific truth, and then say that the challenges of changing it are too great. And I think what we've all got to remember, which I think is the way to invite people in, is that it is a social construct. How we account for value in its broadest sense is something that we get to decide on as a society. And it is something, therefore, that we can change together. And that is exactly how financial accounting happened, and it is exactly how the future of accounting needs to happen.
And Elias, if we were to take that conversation to young people in South Africa or Africa, and picking up on the words that you used earlier, how do you have that conversation? How do we embrace bringing young people into a place where they believe it, all of us, basically, that we're here trying to genuinely make new decisions about what that contract and what that economic system looks like as we go forward?
The reason I started where I started is because the recipients of the concept are not feeling it. They don't see it. When you look into the room now, it's only the owners and the allocators of capital in here. We don't have organized labor. I don't know if we have NGOs. We definitely don't have, We definitely don't have the youth. And these are the people that we should be engaging. It is always said, when you do something or when you make policy, make sure that you make it together with those people who are going to consume it. If they are not there, if they're not there to quality check the product that you want to give to them to consume, the risk is you may end up with an output that will not be consumed. And that is the challenge. It starts with making sure that you craft the right concepts, you craft the right product, so that by the time you put it out to market, it is well acceptable. In policy 001 or policy 101, it is always argued that you can have the best policy in the world, but if it's not accepted, it is unimplementable. And the reverse is true.
So if I can maybe ask both Jed and John then, just to sort of respond to that in a way which is, how does that translate into our sort of ideas or aspirations around the Impact Act and legislating around how we change behavior, and at the same time engaging people differently, genuinely finding ways to bring the right people into the room. How do you have a focused conversation whilst at the same time one that everybody sort of can get behind? I mean, what does that look like? So,
I think before you can change behavior through legislation, you have to look at the underlying behavior. And so, to Elias's point, we should think creatively about how we're engaging with the communities with which we hope to observe that impact and see that impact. For example, it seems to me that a venture capitalist needs to have a vendor from Kampala or someone from Rio de Janeiro to help them to evaluate a project and a risk, because those are the people who are closest to it. Those are the people who understand it. Expanding the definition of what constitutes an investor is, I think, the beginning of behavioral change that then gets you to the policy change. And if you're going to talk about policy change, speaking about this from a US context, in the healthcare sector, which is the largest commercial sector in the United States, one of the things that's occurring there is a shift in what securitization means. And we're essentially seeing healthcare systems that are moving from activities to outcomes, taking on risk and essentially becoming insurers. And that means that they're actually coming into partnership with their patients. They're not just doing work on those patients, they rely on those patients to help them not only improve the population's health, but also to improve their bottom line.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason this is important in terms of this conversation of reframing the relationship is that we each of us, I think, and as a field as a whole, have fallen into a set of actors promoting solutions and answers and pitches and strategies and funds and instruments. And instead, we need to step back from our answer and have a real connection and dialogue and communication based on that trust, based on the dignity, which then will create solutions out here that neither one of us would necessarily see today. But from my perspective, here's my answer and here's your answer, and we have to fight about that.
Right.
And I think the future gets created out of this dialogue and this process of co-creation that is what will ultimately take us toward the rise of the impact economy in a very real sense. And we tend to focus so much on, is it this definition, is it that metric, is it this thing? We look at our shoes instead of the sky, and it's really, we have to go higher and lower in order to go forward together. And I think that's what we really have to remain focused on.
And I think, if I can claim another word, the other word for me is wisdom. And the idea that, Amit talked yesterday about the various paradigm shifts in terms of the way we think about economy that have been, from the mind, and that's very important. But, this paradigm shift needs the heart there too. And knowledge and everything that we understand and collectively share is really, really important, but it's secondary to a capacity to understand how we are going to use that. And it feels to me like this is a moment where we really need to get very collectively wise. And so, Sir Ronald has for a long time talked about the invisible heart of markets. I think that invisible heart is increasingly visible, and it's increasingly visible in places that we wouldn't necessarily think about being part of an impact economy or even an economy movement. It's artists and entrepreneurs and young people all over the world who have a completely different sense of the passion for changing something. And so the leadership challenge to this room and to the rooms that you are also part of is, how does that turn into something more substantive? How do we really invite people into something which is going to change the way that we collectively behave, so that we can actually move towards some of those things that we all know will need to be done. We have 43 seconds, 42, 41. I'm going to ask my panelists to very quickly throw a challenge out into the room. And I'm going to start with Elias. One challenge, one request, one whatever. What do you want from the group here to progress our conversation?
Agency.
Join in, back to the social construct. We have to do this together, especially how we account for value.
Lead with joy and creativity.
Read and reflect and sit more deeply with the questions that will lead you to better answers, as opposed to leading with your answer. And let me just say really quickly, while I have the microphone, the video that you were kind enough to watch is the musical interpretation of a free ebook called The Purpose of Capital, that explores some of the historical, cultural, and wisdom traditions that have brought us to where we are today. And I encourage you to maybe download that from purposeofcapital.org, and I hope you enjoy that as well.
Thank you. And so thank you very much to all of my panelists and to all of you for being patient with us.